after the Constitution was ratified in 1791, the Bill of Rights articulated many of the rights and liberties that we cherish today. In the structure of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights only limited the power of the federal government. Why did the states have so much power? The framers were hesitant to give too much power over the states or individual citizens to the national government. In addition, most states already had their own Bill of Rights, and the framers thought that citizens would have more control over their state and local legislatures than the national government, so they did not think it was necessary to protect citizens against encroachment by their own state governments. The 14th Amendment, adopted in 1868, provided a way to impose limits on the states similar to the limits placed on the federal government by the Bill of Rights. The language of the 14th Amendment provided that states could not restrict life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Certain fundamental liberties were thought to be inherent in the 14th Amendment notion of liberty. But which liberties? All of the Bill of Rights? Typical of the Supreme Court, it undertook a very slow process through which they determined on a case-by-case basis which freedoms were essential for our structure of ordered liberty to exist. More than half a century after the 14th Amendment was ratified, the Supreme Court acted in a case that extended constitutional protection against state infringement. In 1925, citizens argued that speech was so essential that it be protected not only from impermissible federal government infringement, but also from the states. The court held in Gitlow versus New York that the 14th Amendment Due Process Clause protected the right to free speech against state infringement, because without that right, the structure of ordered liberty would cease to exist. What was the impact of this decision? First, states would now be required to protect speech rights in the same way the federal government was required to do so. Second, the court emphasized the idea of the protection of fundamental liberties, not necessarily because they could be found in the Bill of Rights, but because without these liberties, our system of government would cease to exist. Because Gitlow held that only fundamental liberties were incorporated to the states, a long and arduous process of visiting each right and selectively incorporating only those deemed fundamental took place over the course of the next 4 decades. This process, called selective incorporation, persisted regularly, incorporating much of the Bill of Rights until 1969. Arguably, by that time, most fundamental liberties had been incorporated. But in 2010, the Second Amendment was finally incorporated to the states. Nearly 100 years after the court's decision in Gitlow, thanks to the actions of citizens petitioning the Supreme Court to incorporate fundamental liberties, both the national and state governments must respect the fundamental liberties protected by the Bill of Rights and the 14th Amendment.